Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for people who are curious about how to have a more fulfilling work life. We live in a world largely driven by numbers, logic and reason. But how we feel at work and about our work impacts us, our organisations and society. There is a relationship between the numbers of our organisations and the life beyond the numbers. I'm Susan Ní, your host. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't, people who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. But one thing that I've learned that is common to us all is that we are all unique and have unique experiences. And it's helpful to know that there are others who think like we do, or have had struggles too, or have gone where we want to go, or can show us things we didn't know. So join me and my guests as we place a lens on the human side of work life by sharing insights, stories and strategies to inspire you to let your uniqueness shine through. Well, today I am beyond delighted to welcome Steve Wright to Life Beyond the Numbers. Steve, you're so welcome.
Thank you, Susan Ní. I had to say your name. I needed to say your name out loud because I practiced really hard for that one. It's a real pleasure to be on a call with you again and talk and laugh. And I know this is audio, but you're going to have to watch a little bit of the video because we just crack up each other so much. It's great to be here.
This is our second time to speak, Steve, and the minute we went on a call, it's as if I've known you all my life. We're straight off into all sorts of topics. I actually had to say, right, we have to hit record, otherwise we would have done all the talking and probably we should meet again, Steve. This might not be the end.
Absolutely. It's great to be with you.
So, Steve, your career started out in IT, and I see a lot of parallels. Support services, first of all, IT and finance, for example. But I like how you describe the human technology. Yeah, sure, there's information technology, but also your career had a parallel of human technology. And were you always interested in people, or did something happen that made you think about people and not just the information systems?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually, it ties into some of the things we were talking about in terms of just my upbringing, being of Jamaican parents, first generation British, and just being a person that was encouraged to do well. And sometimes that encouragement to do well can take the form of not rocking the boat or even people pleasing. I don't know. Sometimes I think back now that the term people pleasing can often be seen as a weakness, but in the careers that I've chosen, I've used sort of IT to support systems, which are physical hardware, computer systems, but they're used by people. And I used to walk into a building with my toolbox and my oscilloscope back in the day, and people don't want to see me, but they're glad to see me. And it's sort of that dichotomy was always interesting because, you know, you leave the office like a superhero, having fixed the photocopier or fixed the machine or got the network running again. And you walk out there. And if I had a cape, I would have worn it. It'd have been flying in the air or something, you know. And that's part of the joy of the work. It was really a matter of being able to support people that were having a difficult time. And technology's moved on, but I still think there's still always a need that someone has something that needs addressing. And that's always been the driver, I think. I can't think of a particular instance that flipped the switch for me, but it's always been part of my desire to see people righted, things corrected and put straight. And within my capacity in an IT role or in IT position or support position, then that's what I did. And I loved it. Technology is a bit like numbers. It's something that people can measure and people can assess you against. And that can mean a very fulfilling and stellar and a good career because you're measured as you go along. The messy stuff to measure is how well you deal with people.
We're back to the messy middle again here, Steve,
Absolutely.
are we?
Very messy indeed. For me, that drives me now in terms of, sort of 30 years. Yeah, it's been 30 years in IT. I've always had a thread of personal development in that space. Some of my early exploits, I went self-employed as a PC consultant, pre-2000, pre-Y2K and all that drama. And actually ended up working with and for Tony Robbins' organization within the UK, and then ultimately moving out to the States. My career has traversed the UK and the US, 15 years or so in Southern California working there. So people have always been a factor, and I've always enjoyed that side of what I do. So now moving into the support of people space, it's really empowered me, and it's energizing what I do. So
yeah, and I can see it on you as well, for sure. I suppose one of the things I think about with finance and IT, we were in the background. We were never the salespeople or the marketing people or the senior leadership almost. We were always in the background. And do you think that gives us an insight in a way to people's behavior that others might not have? Even when you were fixing something, you were almost in the background and eavesdropping perhaps to what was going on in an environment. You're ignored for the most part until something goes wrong, then you're the most important person in the room. But when it's all going right, you're not. And I don't know, there's a way then of really observing people that you might not get in other roles.
That is so true, because there's hierarchy in everything. And I guess with the higher up you go in a hierarchy, the more dispassionate you are with some of the lower levels. Some of that's just part of the nature of things. Some of that's by design, unfortunately, where you want to sort of distance yourself from responsibility even. And IT is one of those things that touches a lot of stuff. I guess like finance, everyone has to do a budget or put in an expense report. I did that same, or get paid. So, and you're meeting people at the point where they may be vulnerable or hurting. If they've got
frustrated.
Yes. And if they've got an issue, then you're there. And even while you're fixing something, you're having a chat, you're sort of boots on the ground. So the upper management, senior management, C-level will always appreciate the value of those systems, numeric systems in terms of finance and operational systems in terms of IT. It could do them well to actually find out more from the agents in those roles in terms of getting a pulse on the business, because you can't just judge the business by the numbers. And you can't just judge the business by how much time they spend on a computer. There's other factors, there's people factors. And those agents are probably the best people to get you a good sense of what's going on the ground.
It's quite true, really, isn't it? And they're the ones that tend to be more introverted a lot of the time and can weave their way around without being noticed. It's not something I've ever necessarily thought about before, but I can see now how we're observers of human behavior when we're in support services, I think.
And to that extent, it's interesting. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy as well. I'm thinking of data visualization. It just came into my head because we both have numbers and metrics in common with IT and finance. And often to explain what we do, we try and visualize the data or try and give it some sort of meaning or context. And often we can do that because the audience are finance focused or IT focused. But in actual fact, it may be better that we express the sentiment of the people that we work with, the actual users. You see a lot of that now in the IT space in terms of the customer experience role and the user interface role. They're really coming from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. So we need to make sure people are a factor in what we're presenting.
Absolutely. And that's back to storytelling, I think, how to bring people with you. And you have to go from where they're at, not from where you're at. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of miscommunication because of what we're just talking about. And as you were talking, one of my theories is that we've become over reliant on these tools, right? On technology as a way to be smarter or do more or whatever it is. And one of my theories is if we turned off the internet for 72 hours around the world, yeah, Steve's eyes are widening as I say that, but I can't imagine the chaos. And it's a worry as well that we're forgetting how to do things as humans because we're putting so much reliance on our tools just being there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the pandemic, I think, was going to play out in history as one of the biggest globally unifying or globally impacting events that we've ever had. Sure, there's been plagues and things. I think that there's like the 1914 flu or something. There's been things that have killed more people. So if you go by the numbers, as numerically, there may be things that have been more devastating on a global scale. But because we were so connected, the impact and the spread of information and our response to things, it was felt around the world. And I think back in the day, we never had that. So your idea about shutting off the internet for 72 hours, we wouldn't get any podcasts out for sure. So that would be that would be the first challenge. But notwithstanding that, it'd be interesting because we would have to rely on things that we've always had around us, people. We saw that in terms of communities coming together with the pandemic because you couldn't go out or people had to look after each other again. And we actually don't need the internet to go down. We can just detox. We can take ourselves away from things, leave the numbers on the table, go take a walk, turn the computer off. And it's interesting to see how long we can go without tech in our space, without feeling like you're always constantly connected.
And how much we can do. Because sometimes it is a challenge to do stuff. For example, almost everything is on your phone. And my parents in their local supermarket, they have vouchers for the supermarket that any Waitrose or Sainsbury's or anyone would do here. And they stopped doing paper vouchers and put them all electronic. And my parents are in their late 70s, and them, along with half the population of the town, well, maybe not half, said, we don't have access to a smartphone. We want our paper back. And the supermarket listened to the people and did things. So I think there is a thing where we wipe out stuff that we're not taking into account the needs of all the users.
Yeah. I like that story. It's a great story. I had the same challenge. My mum, who's in her late 70s, visited me in the UK, and she doesn't have a credit card. So she went to the bank in Jamaica, rocked up with a bunch of cash, loads of 20 pound notes, and I basically became her banker. She gave me her cash, and then I transacted when we went out and did stuff and bought tickets online and train tickets and so on. So I ended up with a bunch of cash. And this last couple of weeks, I've been walking around spending cash. And it has been the most frustrating, challenging, and enlightening experience for the longest time. I actually talk to people I exchange value with. They have to wait for me to get the change. We have to use math. We have to kind of work out what change I'm getting back. And I start with an apology almost. Do you take cash? And they go, yeah, we take cash. I went, okay, well, here, we're going to actually have a 5-minute conversation while I get it out and work it out what I need to give you. And for me, that was enlightening. I think it was refreshing to be in that space and know I can still use cash.
And my 5-year-old niece might say, what's cash?
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. Yes. Sum up and square and all these touch and pay. That's a slippery slope too, because the same touch action to spend 50p on a candy bar is the same touch action to spend £5,000 on a TV.
And back to being able to visualize things. Before we started recording, we were talking about how difficult it is to know the difference between 8,000 people, 80,000 people, and 800,000 people to visualize. And I think it's the same with money, that like you've just to that point, it's if you can touch and spend 50p and £5,000 in the same way, how do you reconcile that in your head, that there's a difference between those two amounts?
We're disconnecting ourselves from things that make us value things. It's crazy. I mean, literally, if I count out £500 in £20 notes, I'm feeling the value of the £500. Seeing it on my phone as a credit in my account really doesn't mean the same thing to me.
No, it's true. It's really true. So speaking of disconnecting ourselves from things that bring us value, one of the things that a lot of people, and myself included for many years, is disconnected from our bodies and not valuing our bodies. And in my research, one of the things I came across that you said was, I've experienced the transformation that can be achieved with a change in our physiology and psychology. And I don't come across many people who use both. And I found that really interesting, Steve. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. We are whole beings. The numbers at IT tend to be very cerebral, cognitive functions. People think you're smart because you're good at numbers, or they think you're smart because you're good at IT.
Which is a good thing too, obviously.
I love it, to be honest. I love being considered to be smart. But the real smarts come from being able to encase your whole being in terms of how you move your body, how you function within the world, and literally move through the world. If you imagine that we were aquatic beings, we would have to move through water. All right. And I guess fish don't know they're swimming, right? So we don't know we're moving through air. Literally, we're making vibrations and we walk past people and there's a connection. We stand up. I'm standing right now. I'm at my standing desk having this call, and it's a different energy to the call by standing versus sitting. I had a voice coach on one of my calls earlier this week, and she talks about how you hold your body in terms of where your column of air is and how you sound. And she can discern how well you are based on your voice, because it speaks to whether you got a trapped nerve in your shoulder, or your back is out, or you're sitting and standing. And it's just amazing. So physiology and psychology are important. And chicken and egg, I don't know which one came first. I think they're both tied together. I was on another call with a good friend of mine talking about the brain-gut connection. And we call the gut the second brain. But in actual fact, it may actually be the first brain, because if an organism doesn't get nutrients, it won't survive. So the first brain should look after surviving the organism. And then the second brain, which is our actual brain, then determines where you go find the food. That's a whole nother sidetrack there. But psychology and physiology is important. Tony Robbins, I've seen that man in the green room on a trampoline, on a rebounder, before going on stage in front of thousands of people, getting his physiology right before he presents what he needs to present. And it's an important connection. It's a very important connection.
So he's like upping the energy level effectively, Steve, or something. Was that it? Because he often comes out on stage, I think, pumped up, and as the Americans might say, but yeah. A force of nature.
Yeah, there's schools of thought around us, the quantum nature of humanity, in terms of us being energy and vibrations. And whether you think of it as woo-woo and kind of pseudoscience or whatever, I'm not concerned about that as much as understanding that when we got on this call, our energy levels were higher than usual and matching each other. And I think that is something that as people, we really need to tap into, being able to empathetically match our energy and also have the ability to shift it up or down as we see fit that serves the environment that we're in. That's very important.
That's such a beautiful way of talking about it. You've really captured, I think, from moving through air to what you've just said there about the energy. And because one of the things I like to talk about is taking responsibility, personal responsibility. And if I'm responsible for the energy that I'm putting out, like actually taking responsibility for that, I may move through the air differently.
Absolutely. And it's not hard to do so. We need to just be aware. It's taking that pause, maybe shutting off the internet for 72 hours, like you said, taking that pause that says, oh, the internet's down. Then I'm on my own. Then am I really alone? What can I do? Can I read a book? Can I take a walk? And have an intention about what you want to do. And sometimes we're so busy consuming, we forget that we are creators. And you don't have to be a creator in a fancy platform or write a book, but you're a creator in your thoughts and you're a creator in your actions. So yeah, swim through the air, do something.
Yeah, I think that point about we are creators is so important. And there's a performative aspect to creativity or creating that people jump to, I think, rather than thinking if I make a cup of tea, I've actually just created a cup of tea out of nothing. I've gone from there was no tea and now there is.
Yeah.
And it's that simple that you can do anything with your hands or just go outside and create a walk, because taking those steps, you're creating something. And I think we tend to jump to the writing or the art or the podcast, but actually it's much more simple than that.
And what you said is so profound right now, because as we've got parents up in age and obviously we go up in age, there's things that if you don't do, you may not be able to do. So it almost is beholden on yourself to do what you can do while you can do it, because there may be a time when you can't do it. Making a cup of tea for someone who is recovering from a stroke or has dementia is a major creation step, a major step for them in their lives. We take for granted. There's so many things that we do that we take for granted. There's so many things that we don't do that we ought to do because we can do it. If you can walk a flight of stairs, you know what? Walk a flight of stairs, because there's going to come a day when you can't walk a flight of stairs. And that's okay when it comes. I'm not one about living forever. You just got to live well, and you've got to take advantage of what God's given you and use it to the best you can.
Yeah, there's a lot we take for granted. You're absolutely right. And somebody was telling me the other day, I think they read it or they heard it, is that we spend a lot of our life thinking about how much money we need rather than how little time we have. And that a lot of people save for that rainy day or the pension or whatever it is, the house somewhere, blah, blah, blah. But actually, it's using what we have now when we can that makes all the sense in the world.
I guess that's one of the sea changes for me, is recognizing that I probably have more time behind me than in front of me. And plug for a great book, Oliver Burkeman, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. We are mortal. That's in the subtitle. We are mortal. So time management is not about amassing stuff as much as it is valuing what's in front of you and not ruminating on the past negatively and not whiling away the hours in the future, daydreaming of the future, but actually enjoying the present. The present will inform the future, and you can shape the past to support your present. Someone said, I don't know, I'm quoting them, but they say, it's never too late to have a great childhood.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So
I know. I mean, yeah, I actually bought a birthday card today for a friend of mine that's turning 50 next week. And it doesn't say like happy 50th because they were all horrible cards. Like, they obviously think we're old when we turn 50. But the card I picked, when you open it up, it says, have some fun. And that's exactly
perfect.
the message I wanted to send, was like, yeah, like just because we're 50, it doesn't mean we can't enjoy ourselves and have fun and be childlike.
Thinking of blue zones in the world where people live, not just live long, but live well. And living well informs your longevity, I think. And it ties back into the psychology and the physiology. They move, they have community, they vibrate with people. They're not stuck in isolation chambers, trying to prolong cell life. Prolonging cells is not really a way to live. You're better off energetically engaging with the world around you, engaging with generations above and in front of you and following you, laughing and getting those laughter lines on your face that make you more beautiful because you've got the wrinkles in the right spot rather than Botox trying to iron them out.
Or frowns.
Yeah, there you go. That's something that, yeah, it's I can wax on about that sort of stuff for a while. I'm over 3,000 weeks old. I'm 31, I think about 3,100 weeks. So that puts me in my 60s, in my 60th year, actually. And it's one of those things that you think, oh, do you say it? What does it mean? 60 is the new 50 or 60 is the new 40? I don't
It's
care.
not.
60 is just 60. And it's
just
okay.
a number, Steve.
Right, absolutely right. But we don't live by that number.
It's a bit of a sobering thought in one way when you go into that. If it's 4,000 weeks and you're closer to the 4,000 than you are to the 3,000 or to the zero, but maybe that's a good thing. And as you were saying that, I was just thinking, can you imagine us having this conversation 20 years ago or 30 years ago or even 10 years ago? How much have you changed in your 50s?
It's crazy. Yeah, it's interesting. I think every season has its purpose. And having a conversation like this 20 years ago would be different. It would have put me squarely in family building mode. I'd been raising children, and I mean 20 years because I've got 2 adult children now. So it's a different season and a different conversation. I think the common thread would be that I would have enjoyed the conversation because I was having it, regardless of when I had it. If I had it in my 20s, when I was 20s, I was in college, and I would have had that conversation because it would have been energetically just as much fun. In my 40s, I'd have the conversation because energetically it would be just as much fun. Different season, different stuff, ups and downs, dramas, and great times, but the energy will be the same. And I can imagine us having this conversation 10 years from now, and I don't think much would have changed.
Let's hope not. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, look, things are going to change because nothing stays the same. But like for me, things get better all the time. That's how I just find everything is more interesting. I'm more curious. It's just a different way of living, and maybe it's the living well. Could I live better? I'm sure I could. I could definitely live worse. And there's a lot to be said for, I suppose, maybe the decade for me, the 40s to 50s, was learning more about myself, which then enables me to be a better human, I believe.
Again, it comes back to that woo-woo topic of energy, right? Like I said, we've spoken twice, and the energy in both of those conversations has been electric. And we've not even met in person via the IT, the ether. So it can happen. It's the quantum nature of the energy, right? You can meet somebody and there's a spark, there's a conversation, there's a tone, and you're connected. And in my head, I've got no doubt that us having a conversation, putting on our calendars to talk 10 years from now would be just as much fun. I would actually look forward to it. And like you said, looking back over the decade on 40s to 50s where we're learning, there are peaks and valleys in our lives. And again, someone said, it's what you do at the valleys that informs the peaks. And you can look over a time that may not have been as great as you would have liked it to be, or actually was. Things happen, health issues, tragedies, traumas. At the same time, it's an opportunity to learn from those valleys to inform the peaks. So in that case, if you're learning from the valley, then it wasn't wasted. It was an opportunity for you to grow and learn. And energetically, I think that's something that is a constant with us. And it's intentional. You don't wake up in a bad mood or a good mood. You choose the mood you wake up in.
Absolutely. And as you were talking there, I'm thinking about the poet David Whyte, who I have just so much time for, but he says that we kind of fool ourselves into thinking we're never going to have our hearts broken, that we go through life as people avoiding heartbreak. When actually, if we just realized that we were never going to get through life without, like you say, the valleys, then we'd probably enjoy the valleys and the peaks more. Not necessarily that we're going to enjoy the valleys, but we will know that it's just part of life. And of course, some people have a fair share more than others, but everyone goes through crap. No one gets through life without going through things. And I think that's maybe one thing I've seen open up more and more in the last number of years, is it's okay to talk about the crap now. And I think that's a big, big, big step forward for humanity.
Yeah. Talk about the crap.
And
be
it's not
okay.
crap, you know what I mean either.
Crap's a good word. Talk about the crap, being okay. It's okay not to be okay. And at the same time, the valley is perception. It's a perception. Again, we come back to the numbers. Okay, if you made 100,000 in 1 year and then the next year you made 20,000, that may feel like a bit of a valley. It's a number that you can measure and it's dropped. But dropping to 20K in the following year of 100K year may actually be the most revelatory period of your life. It could actually bring out qualities in you, understanding what you value, where you value things, where you place your value. So objectively, I can't say that going from 100K to 20K is bad. It just is. You determine what it is. And then that's not to dismiss anyone's valley, and that's not to necessarily raise up anyone's peak. But we have the power of perception on those things around us. The toughest day in our lives could be what we need to inform the rest of our lives.
And it often has been. The days that were really, really tough are pretty much what got me here as well, you know? So, Steve, what you do now, managers who lead, that's your raison d'etre these days?
Yeah, yes, it is. It is. I started a sort of a coaching practice about a year ago. So it's still very new, very dynamic, identifying where those pain points are, where those needs are. And it's landed around some of my experience as an IT manager, middle manager, dealing with subordinates, people who report to me as a team, dealing with my peers, other managers at that level, and also dealing with managers up. The skill of managing up is definitely a skill. So the managers who lead is kind of a nod to the aspirations of managers who want to be seen as leaders. Unfortunately, in the workplace, it still tends to be much more of a title. Leaders, senior directors, and C-level and above, and everyone else is managers. That doesn't pay service to actually it's not a role as much as an identity. You can manage yourself and lead others. That is across the board. You see it in society, in community, in church, in the workplace. You see it in the home. And so the manager to lead for me is much wider than that. And it's interesting, my Facebook group is fairly diverse in terms of where people are coming from, understanding what it means to be a leader and manage things. And I tend to think of management of things, objects, if you like, the scaffolding, and leading in terms of leading with heart, leading with courage, with vulnerability, humility, because that is what drives people to do things. I was involved in a church for nearly 2 decades, and when people work in a volunteer space, you're not managing them like a human resource. We talked about that term before in terms of they're not widgets. They come with their heart and their soul to serve. And so you have to lead that heart as opposed to manage that heart. So that's my raison d'etre, like you said, very nice in French. And I'm excited for it because it emboldens me to seek out relationships and co-creative partnerships like this one with you, Susan, to see where those needs are and how best sort of coaching resources, methodologies, and practices can help people move from. Sometimes it's transformational, sometimes it's transitional. And that is important to understand the difference, because you might just want to move to the left a little bit so you can get a better view of what's ahead of you. And other times you might need to change who you are to see what's ahead of you. And that's the difference between a transitional move and a transformational one.
You talk about a thinking partnership, which I think is a great way of thinking about coaching. And I don't know if this came from Nancy Klein, but yeah. So I like Nancy's work as well. A thinking partnership. 2 people sitting around thinking.
It's more than that. It goes into that energy stuff again. I'm sorry, I'm going down that woo-woo path. It's synergistic. I had a company, an IT company, when I was self-employed called Syntonics. And the term came from a book on cybersynetics. That term, syntonicity, I guess, or syntonics, came from, it was coined from synergy. So it's 1 and 1 not making 2, or it's not even 2 and 2 making 4, or whether if you squared 2, it still get 4. 3 and 3. 3 and 3, you get 6, but if you 3 times 3, you get 9. It's not as simple as those operations. It could be 3 plus 3 equaling 30,000 or 30 million, because it creates a bond, or it creates opportunities that are far more reaching than you could ever think. And you don't know. It may be 3 and 3 is 3 today, and maybe 3 times 3 is 9 tomorrow. And then you meet someone and there's a chain reaction, or it sparks something in you. So thinking partnership is more than just 2 brains coming together. It's really that dynamic of creating something special. I think that goes beyond what you can imagine. And sitting in the room looking for it. That's the key. If people go in the room thinking, I'm going in with my brain, they're coming in with their brain, and none of them are going to meet. I've got coming in with my agenda, they've got their agenda. We might get half of what we want to get done, because half of my stuff matches with half of their stuff, and we end up with 1. Whereas if you go in there with the intention of really co-creating, who knows?
Yeah, and what you're saying there is like, you might not even get your half across because the other person might be so dominant that it's just their 1 and you leave with nothing. And 2 things. I wish you could see Steve smiling while he spoke. And I do every now and then think about using the video, but your face was just so alive with light. And it's just beautiful, because I can tell you absolutely believe in what you do, which is always amazing to see. And the second thing, I was out for a walk before we started recording, and I was thinking about numbers just like that. Just about how when we square root them, the difference, which speaks to synchronicity, because for me, I had a synchronicity moment when you talked about syntonics. So I'm sure there's something in that as well.
This is beautiful. It doesn't surprise me. I get more surprised when there isn't a spark or a synaptic reaction, rather than being surprised that there is. Which, I don't know, I can't even speak to why that is. Maybe when people are experts, they don't know how they do what they do because they do it in a second nature type of thing. And you almost have to unpack or break down what they do so they can explain what's going on. But for me, my default, and I've posted this before on LinkedIn some ways ago, that my default is happy, period. It just is. and that doesn't mean I'm happy all the time, but it's my default. And things can make me less than happy and things can make me more than happy, but that's where I land. And happy is different to joy. So there's things that just emanate from me. So if I was to break it down, the first thing is to pause, take a moment. When I walk into a customer's office, when something's breaking down, it was great having a toolkit because you literally took the time to unpack, find a space to unpack your tools. Right? And that exercise of taking the covers off a piece of equipment was your time to pause. We tend to run into things so fast and then don't know what we're running into, but we go there so fast to not really take a second to pause or get perspective. And things are usually better than you think they are. And that's a great place to start. And if they're not, you can be curious as to why they're not. And that's a good place to start too.
And to end. Because unfortunately our time has ended, Steve. And I have just so enjoyed this conversation. I'm so glad we've done this again. And Steve and I recorded a podcast episode for Steve's podcast, The One-to-One Thing, episode 45, Leading Beyond the Numbers. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And you should check out Steve's podcast. And if you don't want to listen to me because you're sick of listening to me, listen to the one with his mom to start with, because that is such a great episode. Anyone that interviews their mom like that, it's just so worth listening to. Steve, for people who would like to learn more about you and connect with you, how might they do that?
The easiest way is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably the best way to get hold of me. LinkedIn in SA Wright will get them there. I put MSc, my master's degree, at the end just to kind of separate me from all the other gazillion Steve Wrights out there. And also SA Wright, SAWRIGHT, and my initials and last name, coaching.com. So sawrightcoaching.com will get to my landing page. And I am all for thinking partnership, co-creating discussions. It's so easy to click connect on social media and never actually connect with the person you've just quote unquote connected with. And I'm willing and intentional about taking the extra step to connect. That's how we met. And I'm all the more better for that, for taking that step. So thank you so much, Susan, for having me on your show.
No, thank you, Steve. The pleasure is mine today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the paths we traversed on today's episode. If something rang through for you, be sure to let me know. Or maybe you can share this with someone in your life who would benefit from listening too. And if you enjoy helping others, I'd be so grateful if you would leave a review, so that people who might also be curious about their own life beyond the numbers can discover this podcast too.